You can hear his radio show every Monday at 5 o'clock on the mighty KNON.
Sponsored by?
Sponsored by that guy over there.
And?
That's up to you. I'm not talking about
And Fritz Schultz and the Dirty Boot Band is a sponsor. Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our President of the United States has proclaimed he wants everyone in America to have a fair shot. I'm not exactly sure what that really means. However, in the year 1924, every male child born that year of 1924 had a fair shot for sure. Because if you were a male child born in that year of 1924, you would get your fair shot 18 years later at entering into a war, a great world war. This didn't matter if you were rich or poor, if you grew up to be handsome or ugly, tall or short, fat or thin. If you were a male born in 1924, you were going to war 18 years later. A lot of Texas people did, two in particular, one that was born in Texas, one that got here sort of as fast as he could. The one that got to Texas as fast as he could, he was born in Massachusetts. His name was George Herbert Walker Bush. He was born on June 12th, 1924. He was born into pretty much affluence, had it made pretty much throughout his entire life, was educated later on at Yale University. He also was decorated for heroism in an incident in which he had to bail out of a plane and land almost in the ocean. For this, he won some awards from Congress for bravery and valor. And then just a little bit to the east of here was the complete opposite. By the way, George Bush grew up to be about 6'3", a handsome man, and we know the rest. He would become the 41st president of the United States. But just to our east, over in Hunt County, was the complete opposite of that. A young man, one of 12 children. He was the sixth of 12 children, born to a sharecropper father. Times were so hard that of these 12 children, only three of them of that 12 did not reach adulthood. There was a lot of illness and sickness back in those times. His name was Audie Leon Murphy. When Audie was 12 years old, his dad just couldn't really handle the hardships anymore. He abandoned the family. That left it up to his mother. Then in 1941, his mother passed away. Audie was 16. All of a sudden, he had to be the man of the family. Often that meant, what it did mean, he had to leave school. He had to leave school when his dad left. He was only educated through the 5th grade, and many was the time when he would take a single-shot rifle with one bullet to go out at night or in the afternoon to feed his family. He had a friend say, "Man, you're pretty good. You take that rabbit out or that possum, well, not possum, I don't think it was that bad, dove, whatever was flying around, with one bullet." And Audie would reply, "Well, I'm not trying to brag, but if I miss with that one bullet, my family is not going to eat tonight." Well, 1942 came along, the early part of 1942. In fact, on December 7, 1941, as we all know, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. America was in war. Young Audie wanted to enlist. He'd always wanted to be in the Army, but he had this one basic problem. He was 5 feet, 5.5 inches tall, weighed just a smidgen over 110 pounds. So he was turned down by the Navy, and also he was turned down by the Army paratroopers. But finally, he was given a chance to enlist in the regular Army, so he enlisted in Dallas on June 30th, 1942, and took his basic training at Camp Walters, Texas, which later became Fort Walters. As I said, he had a very hard childhood, a very difficult childhood. He didn't have the usual games that most kids have, only had that 5th grade education. In fact, As a kid, I never even played in a game of baseball. Everything was on this little guy's shoulders. But as soon as he got to Camp Walters, for the first time in his life, he got to eat 3 square meals a day. That was a first for Audie Murphy. Also, at Camp Walters, Audie got to play, just kind of a get-together of some of the troops. He got to play in the very first baseball game of his life. Audie Murphy picked up a bat. Had never even had a baseball bat in his hand before. He stepped up to the plate. In his first swing at the ball, Audie Murphy hit a home run. This perhaps was an omen of things to come. He was sent for his second aid, his infantry training at Fort Meade, Maryland. Several times, though, it looked as though he wasn't even going to be able to take and finish the drills. He was a weak little guy, a small guy. And there was an ordinance, not an ordinance, but there was speculation he may have to be sent to cook and baker school. But he insisted that he wanted to fight and be a combat soldier, which he eventually did. On February 20th, 1943, Audie Murphy arrived in northern Africa. He arrived in Casablanca, and soon after, he found that there was a replacement needed over in Tunisia. A group of soldiers, they were part of actually the 3rd Platoon of Company B of the 1st Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Division, needed a replacement. Audie Murphy volunteered and got the job. Went to Tunisia and trained throughout the balance of that year of 1942. And on February 20th, he had arrived in Tunisia on February the 20th, 1943. And then that summer, in July of 1943, the 3rd Division was sent to Sicily for a combat mission. Audie Murphy, just a few days after arriving in Sicily, went from the rank of PFC to sergeant simply because in an engagement with the enemy, there were 2 Italian officers tried to escape the battle on horseback. Audie remembered those days when he could do business with that single-shot bullet. He took out both officers. Of course, they had 2 bullets. He made each bullet count. He killed both these officers as they escaped. For this, Audie Murphy was promoted to the rank of sergeant. Time went on. By September, the Axis had been eliminated. That was the enemy, Italy and Germany. The Axis powers had been controlled and eliminated in the nation of Sicily. So the unit moved on into the mainland of Italy. In September of that year, almost as soon as they got there, Audie Murphy, by now sergeant, was leading a night patrol that was ambushed by Italian forces. They were trapped into a quarry of rocks, but they burst their way out. Audie Murphy killed 3 Italians and captured about 24 more. For this feat, Audie Murphy was promoted to sergeant. He had been previously promoted to colonel when he took out the 2 Italian officers. He was received his sergeant stripes on the 13th of December of 1943. Exactly 1 month later, January 13th, 1944, he became a staff sergeant, E6. There were some very strong battles waged in Italy throughout that campaign. Among them, the Battle of Valerno River and Anzio Beachhead. However, by the summer of 1944, the troops had conquered Italy. They moved on to where the real war was, which was in southern France. Audie and his unit arrived in southern France on August 14th, 1944. Almost immediately, they ran into trouble. The next 7 weeks of that campaign, which is known as Operation Dragoon, 4,500 American troops were killed. That is the combined forces, folks, of both combined wars in Afghanistan and Iraq today. This was one campaign which lasted 7 weeks, to give you an idea of the emasculation of the casualties of World War II. Then, in the early fall of that year, a Lieutenant Colonel named Michael Pollock was surrounded by sniper fire. Now, Audie Murphy had developed a theory. He believed that a combat soldier should not station himself in one place at one time. He believed in kind of bouncing around and being on the move. And this is what he did in this situation where he rescued Lieutenant Colonel Pollock. He took out 4 snipers, 4 German snipers now, and captured 3 others and wounded 6 others. For this, Michael Pollock recommended that Audie Murphy become an officer, to which Audie said, "Sir, I don't qualify to be an officer in this man's army. I only had a 5th grade education. I don't know how to do the proper paperwork. Thank you, but no thank you." But Lieutenant Colonel Pollock said, "No, sir, Sergeant Murphy, you will be an officer in this man's army." So, on October 14th of 1944, Audie Murphy received his bar. He was a 2nd lieutenant. 12 days later, Audie Murphy was wounded by sniper fire. He would receive a Purple Heart from this, but he had to be hospitalized. So he was out of action. He returned to his unit on January 14th of the year of 1945. By this time, 3rd Division had advanced halfway into France, up into almost the borderlines of Germany, right in the middle of the nation of France, a little bit to the west of the Rhine River, a little bit to the east of what was called the Vosges Mountains. It was frigid cold. The temperature was 14 degrees below zero when Audie rejoined his unit on 14th of January. Then on the 25th, he was appointed as company commander of Company B of 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. There was one problem. Ordinarily, this unit consists of about 128 men. Because of casualties and sickness, they were now reduced to a force of 19 plus 1, that one being Audie Murphy, who was now a 2nd lieutenant in command of the company. On the early morning or late night of January 25th, communications came down that the German army was advancing and wanted to take over that entire region known as the Holzwehr Forest near Holzwehr, France. It was up to Audie's company to stop this German insurgency. So, on the early morning of January 26th, 2 M10 tank destroyers perched themselves on a highway that led into Holzwehr from the woods. They were parked and stationed about 50 yards apart. It was on an actual highway, a frozen highway. The first northernmost tank destroyer got itself caught in a culvert, couldn't drive on the ice properly, bounced off the road, landed in this culvert in such a position where the 50 caliber machine gun was facing in an upright position. In other words, it was unserviceable. It could not be operated. There was a 2nd tank destroyer right behind that. Early that morning, a company of German soldiers, accompanied by 6 what were known as Tiger tanks. They were M12 Tiger tanks, surrounded this unit and began to unload 88 millimeter shells, easy for me to say. Our army was returning 75 millimeter shells, but they just seemed to bounce off those German Tiger tanks. Meanwhile, a grenade hit the tank to the southernmost 50 yards back on this side of the highway. Immediately, half the crew of that tank were killed. The other, as the tank destroyer began to turn on fire, they escaped just barely with their lives. Right on the side of that highway was Audie and his 19 men. He commanded his men to return back to the woods. Audie said, "I'll join you folks later." He had an M1 carbine rifle, a few grenades, and a telephone. That's all Audie had. And he was being surrounded by legions of German troopers. Probably the same area of what I'm looking at today with this crowd. Hope y'all don't try to attack me. Anyway, Audie had a plan, a very big risk. He jumped upon the burning tank destroyer. He wanted to check out the serviceability of the 50 millimeter machine gun on that tank destroyer. It turned out that it worked. So, for 1 hour, Audie Murphy stood on top of that tank destroyer. Sometimes the enemy came within 10 yards of the tank destroyer. One of them that came within 10 yards shot Audie in the leg. He was wounded once again. However, Audie did not retreat or repel. He stood on that tank for almost 1 hour. Finally, he drove 3 of those Tiger tanks backward, as well as an entire company of German soldiers. It is said that he had killed 50 of those Germans One man doing this, a little guy, 5 feet 5.5, 110 pounds. Finally, he jumped off the tank destroyer. 5 seconds later, it exploded. 5 seconds, if it had stayed on longer, Audie would have perished. Then he ran back to the woods, gathered up his troops, came back to the highway. By this time, that entire company of Germans had retreated. Audie and his 19 men, particularly Audie, had held off a big part of the German army, a very strategic part of World War II at that point. This was January 26th, 168 years ago yesterday. Audie, because he had been wounded again, was removed. He was taken to a position of liaison. He was appointed second lieutenant on the 16th of February, and of course, 3 months later, in May, VE Day occurred. The European theater surrendered. Audie returned to the United States in June. He was released from active duty in August and discharged from the Army in September 21st of 1945. Audie Murphy had always wanted to be a career soldier. Ironically, for this young man whose picture was on the cover of Life magazine, the July 16th, 1945 edition, under his name was the caption, Most Decorated Soldier. But the most decorated soldier of World War II was 50% capacity because of his wounds, was not eligible to re-enlist. Audie would live a life of a lot of torment and fear. He died in a plane crash in his mid-40s, so he did not live a long life. But do not feel sorry for Audie Murphy from the time he was released from the Army until that plane crash in Virginia, which claimed his life on May 28, 1971. Because, if any of you folks don't know who Audie Murphy is, Audie Murphy got a break. That picture of him on the Life magazine cover on July 16th edition was viewed by everyone in America, including an actor in Hollywood named James Cagney, who summoned Audie to Hollywood. By 1950, Audie Murphy was the rock star of their era. Audie Murphy was a cowboy movie star. He was in 26 Western movies. He starred in 23 of them, 44 in all. But his life was cut short. And that is the legacy of Audie Murphy. This week, if you've noticed, the Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, has ruled that women are eligible for frontline combat duty. Now, I'm not trying to make a political stance here, but probably your typical woman, ideal weight for a typical woman in height and dimensions, would be about 5 feet 5 inches tall, 110 or 115 pounds or so. Maybe that's what Leon Panetta was thinking. Hey, if Audie Murphy was that size, surely we've got some women that size too can do the same thing. Thank you for your time. It's time now for Pastor Jay.